All right, welcome everybody to a Common Sense reading series. Uh, for anyone who's here for the first time, I'm Jordan Stempelman. I've been hosting this series for 11 years now, which is strange, given that I never saw that I would ever host a reading series, but just, became something that was necessary here in town. So 11 years go by and now into a pandemic, it still goes on. I'm really excited to welcome tonight's readers, BJ Soloy and Kiki Petrosino. Next month, I'll be hosting Emily Pettit and Jason Teal. Information as well as a registration link for all the upcoming readings will be found on my website, which is jordanstempelman.com. And you can just go under the Common Sense tab. I'll post that along with different links for tonight's information for tonight's readers, where you can find their work in the chat. I've also archived the previous readings on my website as well. So you can check out Anais Duplan and Tim Early and Carrie Lorig and Jane Wong and Dianelli Antigua Carol Pagel, and then KCAI's creative writing double majors, Riley Lawver and Emily Mooney there as well. So I really recommend checking those out. Some great readings. And as BJ and Kiki and I were mentioning, and this wouldn't be possible otherwise. So there's one good thing about the pandemic is that, bringing these writers who I admire deeply, to the series and to share with, I see a lot of, local Kansas City people here and other people all over the country who might not get a chance to hear these writers read is a really, a wonderful, aspect of what we're in right now. I also want to acknowledge that tonight's event was made possible by generous contributions from the Kansas City Art Institute Gallery, the Center for Contemporary Practice, and the Creative Writing Program at the Kansas City Art Institute. So our first reader tonight is going to be BJ Soloy. BJ is the author of Our Pornography and Other Disaster Songs, which was selected by Ocean Vuong as the winner of the Slope Editions Book Prize. And he's also the author of Selected Letters, which is out with New Michigan Press. He has work in places like Field, Forklift, Ohio, Colorado Review, New American Writing, and Court Green. And he lives and teaches in and around Kansas City, Missouri. So if you're in Kansas City, hopefully you get to see BJ around. Maybe now you know what he looks like without the mask on, so just look for the eyes. So welcome, BJ Soloy.
Thanks so much, Jordan and Kiki. Thrilled to hear you in a minute. Agreed. This is a strange time, obviously, but it's so great to see Becca from Iowa City and Andrew from New York, Henrietta from Missoula, Montana, and then Missouri friends alike. So welcome. This is kind of what I look like. I realize I sort of look like someone at a forced country wedding, but it's half accurate. I'm going to read the first few from my book, and then I'm going to jump to just one from the chapbook and then some new stuff. So here it is. I should say Our Pornography is a book-length poem, so there aren't any titles. So I'm just going to be kind of skipping around willy-nilly. We'd been heading towards some ugliness in the west, trailed by a haunting of murdered dusk smudge, wood panels denoting the current echoing era with its tender-footed station wagons and increasingly danceable radio hiss. Now water achieves steam somewhere nearby, or an articulate child is losing her young mind. Either way, I retreat to our motel and watch a royal baby on the television. I am vanishing. I am vanishing. But hey, each of your eyes is a one-way wound. You're a miraculous machine more than capable of turning the wine into words. See the signpost with a photograph of Chimney Rock just off the highway side in front of actual Chimney Rock. I can't help it. I wanted to photograph this landscape because fuck me, I can't help myself. But hey, we're all complicit in this drama. We struck and killed a happy family of authentic Nebraska tumbleweeds migrating on their way across 26. You wanted to pull over and take a photograph to remove the cap, set the light meter, memorialize the crime scene as theater. We've spent many acts in these sort of cars. Flashback to the back seat of Dave's yellow Cadillac. You snuck a muscle into my mouth at last. A supple puzzle, a supper. Sweetheart, I already told you that I was full. I own no camera. Hey, I already told you I was vanishing. Passing your mood-lit windows, I thought you had a triptych on your wall. Now, I think it was just 3 coats hanging next to each other. I'm on the toilet, feeling for matches when a car goes by. Planes circle, vultures crash, then of a sudden, the kitchen light lit the cricket circuit of firing. Your coats would be worth more monetarily if they were conceptual art. Perhaps you know this and wear them in defiance. Or perhaps it's a model home, all art, 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 like that. I found a bone in the backyard. Apparently something has died. A car goes by. There are noises in the night. It's okay. Then I buy a new toothbrush, fill up my gas tank, and am invincible. I walk outside and then later inside again. The highway rotates and crackles a mile away. I meet a man with a smile like a car wreck, a sidecar for his son. If I asked him for directions, he'd only make them up. When my head is removed, it doesn't carp. It's quiet, solitary comfort. After a long day of sunlight, it's peeing after sex. It's trading in all my euros. Gaining some weight and some beard, I forget how many Hail Marys I've said and start over again. I put on my slut pants and hit the town running, returning home with a pornographic magazine from a dumpster. We discussed the nature of dialogue. It seems like we are fighting. Maybe we are flirting. With orgasm inevitable, I begin to make the sound of a small airplane circling down. A coastal motel comes in handy for this. The ocean, the HBO. If you place a passing highway to your ear, you can hear both. Winter dries the skin and I look more constipated than Joshua Bell on Sibelius. Don't let your boys always play lead. Maybe because our ancestors were maybe distilling their furniture to methanol, a sturdy pedestal on which to lay/lie one's battled head denatured. We are always tired. The upstairs neighbor drags maybe a corpse across her floor. Stocks rally. Winter vacuums the temporal world from itself. The strays loiter in the parking lot, and sadistic holiday music replaces the alarms of animals fucking on the accumulated snow. Stocks rally. Sometimes put your boys in dresses. To escape the suction noise of interred apartment life, we end up at a restaurant. If I am struck by a wayward automobile, preserve my pickled digits on display on a mound of ice, each pointing to an exit. If I am poisoned by a chef de cuisine or a particularly meaningful moment preserved in high definition on the Hallmark Channel, maybe I'll partake in some regional art. Elk vomiting steam in Missoula, or apocalyptic beach furniture in Charleston. Breaking news is it gets darker earlier lately. I don't go outside, but I've been told. I'm losing my way. I've been told the rate hikes are a sign of confidence in our economy. Des Moines, I'm rescuing your visiting homeless boy from the wilds of the Quick Trip parking lot on 15th. He'd managed to wander into the territories, and I'm driving him to a shelter. He speaks of Egypt, of Freud and cocaine. I listen and steer and smile and honk when he gets out. The sky pretends to die in its glowering turgor. What do you think about it? In this city of permanence, vis-a-vis a blunted fossil and a near empty museum, graffiti on temporary construction becomes our prosthesis for the epiphanic ending. A mandala, a fist of fingers pointing the way away. Classic rock neighbor shoots at me with a gun made of his fingers. This means hello. I flap my hand's white handkerchief, which means, behold, the discursive sunwise, patches of ungrassed field. A storm occurs, so I look in the closet for a radio, an echo scanning for a source. A storm occurs, meaning we've received your feedback and we'll take it into consideration, meaning the current era is matter dominated. So the city buzzes, quiet, teeming child, while afield, a bee deflowers some sea lavender in the key of C. You turn your face to mine like a slap. The city is unsung, and in the collapse of my posture, there is a spark. So selected letters is a bunch of letters to dead celebrities and live celebrities and dead friends and live friends. And I'm tempted to improvise and read the Andrew Martin one because he popped up on here, but time's a wasting and I gotta go. So I actually decided that I just wanted to read one from here, and it seemed timely because there's a lot of discussion about post-Trump era kind of reaching across the aisle and making amends, and CPAC happened, and of course we're all going to figure things out soon. So I wanted to read this in the spirit of bipartisanship. Donald J. Trump, hyperobject. None of the televisions at Eatery A is your head in an aquarium for now. In another letter, I just told Philip to go to Greenough Park and watch waxwings feed each other like berries, like Roman perverts. Have you seen Caligula or Satyricon? Those are my two favorite movies about you. First nice day in weeks, and my mood suddenly dark as the wine shits, you ruddy fuck. You look like meat, piled twixt something in an Arby's commercial. First nice day, there's bound to be a car accident. People smoke more in the West, like it's a casino. Maybe it's the forest fires and the clean air tindering. Of course, there are no cars trying to reach communion at high speeds, you muppet. Fuck, it's obvious it's falling in love with the bartender or drooling on your pillow, dreaming of salt. I'm a truckload of firewood. I can tell a season by its calendar, a smell sometimes by its smell, you perfumed dick. Maybe I'll take up smoking now that I'm back in the Midwest again. Maybe I'll set a tree on fire, you effigy of fragrant repression. Let's keep talking about Romans, you bloating rectum. You are raising an army. We will feast on your corpse. So that's for it's for bipartisanship. And then a last few here from a newer manuscript, as of yet unclaimed, so full of potential. Back on Central Street. It's the season of not wanting to get out of bed. It's also Chevy truck month. You're in another town where the air tastes like Christ's return and Roundup, while I'm writing you from back home, of course, where it always looks like rain. The wolves in my dreams let me know what was coming, but I still shiver as it comes through the door. Long story long, we extract ourselves by landing at what the church basement hold your breath alcoholics call bottom, a magic trick. This day's wind comes through and I'm always here, a basement in tornado season. The four chambers of my core are 2 themed restaurants, 2 themed hotel rooms. I'm art on the wall of an ecologist's office. With the present season already pickled and otherwise enfeebled, I clap my lids together to regather. Gather around me, predictable, summonable dark. Introduce yourself. Indistinguishable chatter. Years later, I find myself empty and at bottom, tossed into a dry well and seeing the night sky at 1.5 hours past noon. Years later, I'm passing through Des Moines like a kidney stone. Years earlier, I slept in the basement. We had mice, lonely as the 3 songs Mom knew on piano. Years later, you sit in my boxers on the couch, cuter than a mouse turd. Our dog-faced boy stinks beside you, a pillow of twitching sleep. If I died tomorrow, what would you sing for my funeral songs? I don't have a real suit. What would you burn me in? Place me in the garden and face me toward the sun or brightest object around. Years earlier, when the sun was worth talking about, I could sell my shadow by the foot. The first time we slept by each other, after sleeping together for the first time, I only had these 2 old pillows, always in abundance, and I gave them both to you. Julie, I didn't sleep at all that night. Years later, you're freezing in your sleeping bag. I look up at stars and have no idea what to look for. It's like looking at the stock market or the panic in your eyes. The man who sells us firewood on the Missouri border has a voice very rough, but very sweet. The voice of a retired dominatrix with pneumonia, whose hand I'm holding with both of mine. Our dog-faced boy snores as gnats gather round his junk as if it's all a holy river in cancer season. At this point, we're just burning the rest because we have it. I'm gonna say this is peak 2021. I'm reading these poems about my wife, and she's downstairs watching me through another computer, through Zoom. So here's Intimacy, copyright 2021. Novelty country song. Well, tonight is not the only place I am tonight. Beyond me and between me, light bulbs hiccup and burble, and a frenzied squirrel loses its map of maples and restarts. Maybe we ought to take what we've still got and laminate it in frost, and then salt, and then the gold leaf over spring's pat rapture. There are things I've learned already this young, soft year I don't know what to do with. One gets a pregnancy test when in the ER for their attempts on their own life. What to name that baby? I worry I'm doing this wrong. I've got beans soaking, sharps and meds hid in the last dank well swill of our bank account, miraculously transformed into boxed wine. Winter's here with its expressive eyebrows and doomed neighborhood cats under every car. You yawn, so I kiss you, and you taste better than free food, but you can't sleep. And I try to stay up, reading, but layers of exhaustion, wet blankets on this piss whisper of a fire keep accumulating. I worry you'll do it right next time, and I'm still attached to this day of ours, whatever day it is. Two more short ones. Sighing. I pity those who will never get to see you naked. I pity you too sometimes, for you married a boy, a white boy, a Midwestern white boy. It's sleeting outside, and I am outside, part of the landscape. It's been a long week. We say every week. We've plans to make plans. I'm walking home to you. This apology is complicated. My face changes. I must have scratched my eye or let the left side of my face sink through the mattress and into nether life last night. Can half of me just see too much now? Am I marked? A Bell's palsy, a broken window letting the bees in. My one eye cries now at the mere day's discount lighting. So much so that Jean Ann, ringing me up at the market, asks if I'm okay. How do I center this swimming world? How do I answer? And last one, thanks again, Jordan, and for everyone that's showing up and Kiki for sure. Glass breaking. Sitting there with buzzers in your hands, like draining a cyst, like emptying out a dictator's bank account, my sugar pill, my bunny pants. Your plaid gown grows as you shrink. Naming your enemies, consider the plasticity of the brain as the sky falls, letting something in to help you let something out. It helps. You gather everything you have left, and all it is a breath, and all it is a breath that is all you need. The night, never quite equitable, I always want more, always tired tomorrow. I stay up reading endless fiction while you dream and kick and scream and sigh, rolling under our blankets as under tides. You've a scar on your knee from your first time in the ocean. I took you there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, BJ. Thank you so much. It's great. Last time I heard you read was when you had that beautiful dog, you know, down at on your chair, I guess it was, for this formal reading release. Who I saw when you first came into the room, right? The dog was there before I saw you.
Yeah, which is another simulacrum. We actually lost him at the beginning of the.
Did you really?
Of the pandemic, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Oh, he had a good long time, but yeah.
Yeah.
Solomon Longfellow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I prematurely grieve animals, you know, right when I get them as puppies, I prematurely start grieving them for some reason, maybe just because they move too quickly through this world or something. So,
No.
But anyway, it was great. It's great to hear you read. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So our second reader is Kiki Petrosino, And Kiki, I don't know if I've heard you read since we read together in Iowa years ago. I mean, it's been that long, and so this is great to hear you, and it's great to, I just finished, White Blood, and I loved it, and anyway, it's thank you for being here. So Kiki is the author of 4 books of poetry. Her most recent collection, which I mentioned, is White Blood: A Lyric of Virginia. She has written a book called Witch Wife. Hymn for the Black Terrific is another one, and Fort Red Border was her first collection. They're all through Saraband Books. I'll put a link in there. I put one up for BJ for his book, but you can find all of Kiki's books there. She holds graduate degrees from the University of Chicago and the University of the Writers Workshop at Iowa. Her poems and essays have appeared in Poetry and Best American Poetry, The Nation, the New York Times, Fence and Gulf Coast and Jubilat and Tin House, online at Plowshares. She teaches at the University of Virginia as a professor of poetry. Kiki is the recipient of a Pushcart Prize and a fellowship in creative writing from the National Endowment from the Arts and Al Smith Fellowship Award from the Kentucky Arts Council. Please welcome Kiki Petrosino.
Hi, thanks everyone. Jordan, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It does seem like a long time ago that we were working together at the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. But it also seems like just yesterday that we were there, BJ, thank you for your wonderful poems. It's an honor to read with you. I'm going to read a couple of poems that are new, and then I'll read some poems from my new book. This is Gentleman Caller. The white man mother met at the gym calls every night now. He's no one special. They met at the gym and now it's closed. He wants to talk for hours. Mother says, now you don't really need to call me every night. And the gym is closed now. He says, I just like this. I like talking to you. And still mother says, now. Her green voice, a runner vine spiraling up the window and out over the house every night as the white man keeps saying, this is just what I like. This poem is Water Wheel / Mercy Prayer. I couldn't decide what to name it, but it's a revision of Proverbs 21 verses 1 and 2, which goes, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. All around in the water, all around, in the hand of the Lord say, all is water, turning even the president wherever he will. What is water to the president? A turning wherever, yet in the Lord, even the president's heart. All around there goeth streams, which by hand the Lord turns, hand by hand, president by president, he turns the waters. The Lord goeth wherever he will, so that by turning even the heart waters. Do you hear? Every heart shall turn and water, every president a turn of water in the Lord's hand. For the Lord goeth all around, wherever the heart is, even wherever the president is now, turning as he will. Quarantine. Home so long, I've grown a film. I scrub and it doesn't matter. I'm pale as instant oats now, gray as tidy cats. Home so long I feel stabbed by the wipe under each paw emoji, the swab up my nose emoji, the not seeing mother anymore emoji. How my friends all stitched themselves new faces and left me home so long my windows fog. Home so long my floors grit. So long, lipstick called stunna, lipstick called marshmallow fluff, So long, at the bottom of my purse, you may be a seahorse by now. Home so weedy, it's like a crown I wear in the sea. Like I used to complain. I just want to stay home for once, not order tacos with people, or drink gin and tonics from glasses, or eat smashed avocados and chips with people. Red onions, yellow chips, green alert, friends aiming onion rings like stun guns as I passed by in a crowded bar. So long now, the concept of stunning. My glittery tops wadded at the root of my closet. So long, my tapers for the dead, whom I visit nightly in their vegetable patches, my dead, warm in their peacoats, rising from the morning earth, with blue mist at their collars, my dead humming in one voice, letting me put my dream hands to their faces, saying they feel so much better now, and offering me fistfuls of sweet lettuce, which I chomp just to see, so long, my own bite marks in the leaves. Okay, and now a couple poems from the book, from White Blood. And this book is all about ancestry and genealogical research connected to Virginia, where I'm broadcasting from, and where my ancestors originated. Yeah. Prelude. You're on a train, and your ancestors are in the quiet car. The quiet car is locked with a password you can't decrypt. You're a professional password decryptor, but your ancestors are demolition experts. You're wearing black tactical gear, and your ancestors are wearing black tactical gear. You're dashing through each compartment, slamming doors open, while your ancestors lay small explosives. As the heat expands within the carriage, you escape through a picture window. You climb to the top of the train, and your ancestors rappel down the sides. You're rappelling down one side of the train when you glimpse your ancestors above you. They leap from carriage to carriage, as if weightless, as if drifting, as if curling tongues of snow. You cling to the side of the train as each of your ancestors lifts away from you. They float into the cloud of themselves. In the rushing light, you perceive them as hundreds of slow snake doctors. Oh, you begin. I wrote a few poems in response to uh, Thomas Jefferson's home at Monticello, which is located in Albemarle County. That's where Charlottesville is. That's where I'm broadcasting from. It's where Monticello is located. Instructions for time travel. You must go through Mr. Jefferson, along his row of Chinaberry trees, behind the ruined smokehouse, in unmarked tracts under field stones, with no carvings, no monuments, with a few leaves shadowing the mulch, near scattered weeds, in sunken lines, while the sun walks in the day at the end of the day, in an oval of brushed earth, just as the soft path finishes, under branches where the dead are always saying what they always say, right about me. Essay in architecture. The human face, its pine doors painted like mahogany, human face with horses under each veranda. Perfect parquet tetragons of the human face still legible in Old French. Sealed closet of the human face, lit by oculus, design face, tinker face, factory face, twine and bare wood comprising a pulley system for the human face, woodworked face with sunbeams settling in, revolving buffet supporting the human face, entire pewter plate collection in the face, human face as soup tureen, as paint chip, as spit jack, smoke rings textured like the human face cured, human face pickled, human face brushed with olive oil, anchovies, and parmesan, green floor of the dome room just above the human face, floating view of the face, its quarter farms, rough cabins dotting a sloped face partly visible, human face built to resemble a great clock, great pendulum drawing faces in the air. I'll move to some poems that are more about my my ancestral county of origin, which is Louisa County, and that's the county right next door to Albemarle County. So I'm always really close to where my ancestors were from. So this is all happening in central Virginia. A Guide to the Louisa County Free Negro and Slave Records, 1770 to 1865. The first box is for all the good white men, the ones who freed their slaves on Christmas. It's always Christmas in the first box, the day Delpha shall go out, the day Viney shall go out. These good white men only desire the guardian care of those underage. After that, they shall go out, just as Winnie shall go out at the age of 21, entirely free from me or mine or any other person whatsoever. Delpha, Viney, and Winnie shall go out on Christmas Day. The first box slides open to show their certificates. The good white men of this county, believing that all men are by nature equally free, have left many of these. One certificate is for Viney, one for Winnie, one for Delpha. But these good white men can only free the slaves they truly own. One man observes, the above-mentioned Negroes are disputed in their titles to me, namely Delpha, Viney, and Winnie. He doesn't say more about the dispute. He doesn't say what happens on Christmas Day. This good white man has said all three should go out precisely on Christmas Day, but now it is different. It is very different now, even though Christmas has come. The good white man writes, I only free as to my right and title given under my hand. The first box slides open to show certificate after certificate. It's Christmas. So, I mean, Louisa County, it's a county in central Virginia. And after the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau set up an office there. And the purpose was that it was like a federal office that was there to basically help the newly freed African Americans make their way in these counties where they had formerly been enslaved. And so they would help the freed people build schools, and they would also help enforce contracts that many of these freed people would enter into with their former enslavers, to take care of crops and do things like that. And so to help people, to help the newly freed people not be taken advantage of, they would sort of like help out if there was any kind of dispute about these contracts. And in right after the Civil War, there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of stuff going on between the Black and white community, all over the South, but especially in Virginia. And I was able to, I found a letter dated 1866, filed with the Provost Marshal's office in the Freedmen's Bureau, written by a white woman about a dispute that she was having. So I'm going to read that poem, and this is a 2-poem warning. Mrs. A.T. Goodwin's letter to the Provost Marshal, 1866. You ask why I raised my hand to that boy, why I gave him some raps over the head. You ask why I took my small riding whip to his shoulders, his head, why, you ask, when he would not cut logs at the woodpile. You ask why I took him by the hand and gave him some raps, when not one stick did he cut from 12 to 4. I told his mother, my milker washer, I told her in plain words he must do better. I told her all this without any improvement. She was insolent, which is why my son struck her. He only struck her when she ran from her cabin to pluck up the boy, while I was giving him some raps over the head and shoulders with just my small riding whip. Understand, sir, this boy had not cut more than 2 scant handfuls of wood from my cook stove, but all the family were engaged to me, his mother, the boy to bring my horses to water, to cut wood. Only yesterday he said, I shall not cut a stick of wood, I shall not touch it. So these are the Negroes we have raised, never abused a single one. always had the kindest feelings, the kindest, so long as their conduct were tolerable, so long as I did not have to stand by my wood pile, smelling the wood pile, the smell of the sap intolerable from 12 to 4, the heave and snap of the clear sap inside the logs, never holding still, so that I had rather stand in the house, my hands sifting flour across a board, so that in truth I had much rather be still, holding nothing but my riding whip, dark and folded up, small. This is the last poem. It's one of the last poems that I wrote before I left Louisville, Kentucky, and I wrote it in response to an incident of racial violence that happened at a Kroger grocery store. A white supremacist came and killed 2 African-American elders in the store. And I wrote it, so this is even before the unrest that happened, last summer. But I kind of wrote it for the city of Louisville, but also for the country in thinking about these divisions. Psalm. Dear Lord, dear high remembrancer, dear providential love, have mercy. Have mercy, thou surveyor of wildflowers, assessor of royal and exquisite bee realms. Have mercy, ledger, who tracks us in the night, who measures without speaking our dark trespasses. For nothing here survives, not the gold-legged deer browsing the bleached office park at dawn, nor the minute finch on her branch of long division, but thou absorb it all. O gazer, be kind in thy absorbing calculus. Won't be long before thy reckoning curve arrives at the junction of our error. How, beneath thy mineral eye, we walk abroad, forgetting thee, cartographer of sparrows.
Thank you, Kiki. Thank you so much. So I want to open up questions to everybody. I know that I have questions. You can type your questions into the chat, and I'll go ahead and read those for Kiki and for BJ. And I know, I mean, I've got one question that I think that's just on my mind right now, and I think it applies to both of y'all, but maybe not. Who knows? But one question that I had was, you know, I hear a lot of, oh, I don't know, this. The question I have is, how would you describe the way that you all engage with, history or fact or experiential material, as well as including with that as memoir, in that space, in the poem space where you're processing all those states as like a state of currency, like a state of now, and where do you see yourself or hear yourself in those places? And that's something that I've always been really curious about, something I talk to my students about, kind of expanding the self or including selves. And that's something, I'd really like to hear, because I know, BJ, in your work, it feels like, there's this very domestic kind of um, uh, self, but I know that it's not just you, and it's kind of, these layers and layers. And then Kiki, the way that you kind of bring in, historical artifact to say, that there's not only perhaps a lineage that was destroyed, ignored, buried, but also there are states of connection that are otherwise lost, or whatever it may be right now, that need to be, um, um, connected to. So those, I guess that's my first question that I have for both of you. Kiki, you wanna start, and then BJ? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, such a great question, Jordan, and I think it's something that I'm continuing to think about. The short answer is I engage with history with difficulty, but also with a sense of uh, kind of a ravenous curiosity. And I think, the way that I grew up, I think I was taught a pretty standard curriculum about the period of the era of enslavement in the United States. I was taught that, like, I was taught, for example, that every single enslaved person's last name was the name of their enslaver. I was taught that enslaved people didn't leave behind any records of their lives. I was taught that African American people could never know anything about their history prior to, let's say, 1870, which was the first federal census after the war. And when I went in and looked at my own family's records, there wasn't a ton of, there weren't like all these family Bibles or like packets of letters or anything like that. But there were public records. They left wills and testaments. They left all kinds of probate records. They left land to their descendants. They also left names, like they would name their children after one another, which was a very common practice among free and enslaved African American communities. So I realized I actually had a ton of stuff, like documentary material to look at, and that has brought me into the modality of documentary poetics, certainly for this project in White Blood. Though I know that I'm very much a student of it, and it's not something that I was working on in my first 3 books, certainly, but documentary poetics brings the poet into the archive and brings the language of the archive into the poem. So that's what I'm trying to do with it. And I think what you say about how do you place yourself, I feel as though through the writing, that's where you find your own place, like where your position is, as these materials kind of intersect all around you.
And when you were, so a lot of the poems in that collection were erasures, right?
Mhm.
And so how were you seeing, what, using that form, what were you, I guess, discovering in that, through, why did you choose that form of erasure as opposed to something more like Reznikov's testimony of just leaving it there, or something that was just like this, I'm going to, because I think of the way that history is so often manipulated in ways, and just leaving it and saying this is there. So what was the erasure doing for you to perhaps get at something that was otherwise you know not as effective or connected to you in that way?
Yeah. I'm just smiling because I know you love Reznikov. I'm glad that you brought Reznikov.
Anytime I can bring up Reznikov's name.
Bring him into 2021. I was actually, I wrote the erasure poems after taking one of those ancestry. It wasn't ancestry, but it was National Geographic Project, one of those DNA kits. So the erasures were meant to illustrate all of the things that I still didn't know, even though I supposedly have had this scientific breakdown of my supposed ethnic admixture. I'm just making a ton of quotes right now because all the language is borrowed from these like company like terms that are, maybe they are scientific, but they've also been highly branded. And so the erasures come from the little readout of prose that you get when you get your mixtures. So one of them would say Western Africa, such and such percent, and give you a little paragraph about what your distant ancestors were doing in Western Africa and how they migrated or whatever across the globe. And so I just created erasure after erasure. I wanted to take out the original text and sort of white it out or submerge it and create the poem from what language I decided to have remain. And in that, I was really emulating Ronald Johnson's Radios, which is a seminal erasure project from the early 1980s of the first 4 books of Milton's Paradise Lost. I randomly, decided to teach that to my undergraduates in Louisville, my previous institution. And I remembered, you know what, Radios is awesome. And it teaches really well. My students ended up engaging with it quite wonderfully. And it reminded me that this sort of style of erasure was really resonant. So I wanted to bring it into the book.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think of radio sometimes as like the gateway into Paradise Lost, actually, where some students might be resistant to that if they read Johnson's work first.
Yeah.
BJ, I know that was, do you want me to repeat the question? I know that's a long question. But
no, I mean, that was amazing, but I do think, like thinking of Johnson and like the arc or something, but the idea of, I don't know. I guess to get back to the quotes among quotes among quotes among quotes, I feel like that actually speaks kind of well to the way I approach that idea of kind of positioning oneself vis-a-vis history or personal biography or anything. I mean, Alice Notley would use quotes as almost like a spacing mechanism, but my poems will have biographic details that will come directly in the same line with product copyright language, and then brackets from some subtitled movie on a screen while I'm writing or something. That the idea of kind of conflating voices, both very earnest and personal, and then kind of corporate and legalese, and then historical, and then the idea of kind of just compressing that all into I don't know, it'd be cheap to kind of do it like Dickinsonian, like telling it slant kind of thing, but I feel like that's, if I wanted to sit down and do kind of biographic stuff, I would, but it would be horrible. So I keep trying to think of ways to write from a moment, whatever that is, by bringing in the kind of the polyphony of voices that allows something for me new to come out. So yeah, I guess I just keep like you said, layering whatever happens to wander by. I mean, I love Johnson, but I get a lot of kind of ideas from kind of Brian Eno and John Cage and these kind of randomized bits of writing that just get the self out of the way for a minute. And so then that idea of a kind of a composite speaking I that can never quite be trusted ends up being really central to kind of whatever it is I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's the way I only can explain it as measuring the distance that the poem requires. And that to me makes the most sense, is like, do I come in more because the distance is required to come closer, or do I bring in more because it requires me to back out a bit? And that's just what the poem requires based on whatever the content is or the subject matter, oftentimes. That's one thing that again, like with your work, it feels like when you get to the point of maybe reaching the state of sentimental certainty, you undercut that with something that says, it's either humor, or it's another perspective, or it's another experience, and that says, don't feel so certain right here. Whereas like Kiki in like the erasure work, it's like you take something that would be wholly kind of empty and just filled with data, and then you bring yourself into that, or you say, I'm going to kind of position this so it actually means something to me. It's actually saying something other than just some genealogical record that that could otherwise read like biological you know horoscope or something,
Mhm.
right?
I love the idea of the horoscope. That's it. Is like, you're encouraged through the branding to read these
Right.
um summaries as if they tell you something about yourself. It's all very turned towards the individual, at least the US branding of these types of DNA tests. Now, in the case of a person who's African American, you quickly run up against the reality of like, um, okay, but this is like centuries ago, and I don't know if I recognize myself in these particular stories, though I am interested in them and would like to know more. There's always limitations on how much I can know. And I happen to have a membership on ancestry.com, and they do this thing called stories, where your ancestor, they try to like put your ancestor on a timeline of like general events, like things that happened. And until very recently, they would do the same. Your African American ancestors would be on the same timeline as like everybody else who was white, presumably living a more like civically engaged, life of personhood. So it would be like your your great grandmother may have voted for the first time when the like 19th Amendment was passed. And it's like, actually, no. No. So as soon as you try to plug in your individual experience into the collective, particularly for people of color, there's always this like dissonance. Only today did I see that they have a special article about African American women during the suffragette, during the suffrage period. But it's like there's always this lag.
Right.
You have to wait for everything to catch up to the reality that you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I have another question for you all. Just does anyone who's here right now have questions that I'm checking the chat. So I'm trying, oh, here we go. Um, I've got one from Krista, and she says, thank you so much. And Kiki, I loved every line and every president's a turn of water and the repetition of the turning water. And BJ, I love the place a passing highway to your ear. And both these lines made me wonder, how do each of you approach the phenomena of transformation or change in your work? And it sounds like it could speak to just a sensory understanding of change, but also perhaps larger, sensations of change, or yeah, both, to seismic change. So yeah, that's a good question. How do you approach that? Like, how do you get like a little sensation on the back of your neck when you recognize that we're moving through an epoch, or when you're like attentive to a moment of change? Like, how does that work in your work, and how important is it to your work? BJ, you want to answer that one, then we'll come back up to Kiki.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd just say I approach it as with many things in my writing, just kind of self-consciously. And I mentioned the epiphanic ending in a poem, right? Because I do feel like there is this pressure to institute some kind of change, or why else is the reader coming along with you? But then when it becomes a performative, look at me in this 19-line piece, I managed to learn something that we can all share together. And then do that 80 times a book. It turns into kind of this little bit of an act. And so again, I don't want to get so self-conscious that I prohibit myself from actually experiencing change or anything, but I feel like the change is going to happen. And it's often something surprising in maybe the editing process. It's when these connections happen that I absolutely did not set out to combine. That's when you talk about that feeling on your neck, where I'll just like slap the floor and say, God damn, like, here we go. That's a keeper. So it's kind of a non-answer, but for me, as dorky as it sounds, a lot of times the kind of transformative epiphanic moments are of simple rearrangement and adjustment of perspective, where all of a sudden something new comes into light. And I feel like if it's not the intended goal, if every story is not supposed to be kind of an Academy Award winner or something, and you just allow things to happen, that's still through my husk of bitterness, like this magical thing I seek out every time I try and write. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think sometimes the change is outside of the poem, and then inside the poem, and sometimes it's this state that maybe the reader doesn't even see, right? Because you have the world outside the poem and the world inside the poem, and that change takes place because you're aware of that, and that's something that I think is sensational to the poet, and sometimes maybe it resonates differently for the reader. Kiki, what
Well,
do you?
yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, BJ.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, writing a poem in 2021 in the middle of a pandemic. I have a 7-month-old child, my first, and the world is on the brink of destruction perpetually. It's like writing from a moment of change. I mean, in some ways, I think you could say, well, yeah, that's when hasn't it been near that? But again, it becomes an interesting thing where I'm just like, sometimes like with the Donald Trump poem, I'm pretty explicit and maybe boring with it, but I think that idea of letting the surprises come not necessarily from the exterior moment allow, for me anyway, surprise. and that ends up being essential for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kiki, what do you think?
I think that what BJ is saying is similar to how I feel about change in poems. I guess I think a lot about turns in the volta, like where does that happen in the poem? And in traditional fixed forms like the sonnet, there's a place where that turn is supposed to happen. And it can be good to try out forms like that and see where you can put the turn according to the formula of the received form. But you don't, but when you're writing something, you don't want to feel as though you're enacting a turn or faking a turn that doesn't feel genuine to the poem. I think that in my work now, particularly with regard to the documentary, I'm noticing voltas in all sorts of texts that were not produced as poetry. So in the case of that letter that I found online, the Mrs. A.T. Goodwin's letter, it seemed to me that the whole letter turned on this sentence of, so these are the Negroes we have raised. This sentence that is like, she was really angry writing this letter at being called out for beating a black boy, and for having her son beating his mother. She was angry to be called on the carpet there. And that whole sentence of, so these are the Negroes we have raised, never abused a single one, is like the point for her. It's where her anger culminated. And I didn't need to write a new line that would do that. What I needed to do was think about, how can I make this kind of a text that allows that turn to happen in verse, And so that's like such a different problem, like such a different way to pay attention in the writing of a poem than I've ever really done before. I don't even write that many persona poems. This is one of the few that I've ever written. And I feel like it's cool to be judicious about that, and to to say this poem allowed me to work on a problem that I have never worked on before. The turn itself is already in the rhetorical materials that I'm looking at, and so my job is then to transition it from prose to verse.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I love that idea of like a Petrarchan butt hanging out in prose anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
or like in the Great Gatsby, where Daisy turns to him and says, "I loved you too," and it like blows his mind and he freaks out. That's the turn of that entire of that entire novella. The word "to" is the turn that opens everything up, and it's like, now we understand who she is. Now we understand who he is. But it wasn't produced to be a poem. It wasn't meant to be a turn, but it is.
Right. That's where the weight is. I mean, that's where the hinge is. And that sometimes, in a poem, it could be just the sound or something that enters the poem that wasn't there before. Sometimes it's just, like you said, looking at something just askance, or there's just some, register that enters that wasn't there prior. And that's oftentimes I think that's unforced, or when it works well, it's unforced. Another question is, for both of y'all, how central is the concept of performance when your poems are first becoming alive? I love that idea of, the performance of just when they're starting to kind of form. Do you speak them out loud constantly as you write? There's so much soul that comes through in the work that you read. Has this always been a natural aspect of your poetic voice? So yeah, like I think about, like, so the spoken aspect of your work, the way you listen, it's something that I know I'd heard, coming up, and just reading your stuff out loud. How much is that? How much do you hear your work off the page? And how natural is that to you? Kiki, you want to go?
Yeah, I read aloud while I'm composing. For me, the sonic, like what's happening sonically in the poem, is very important to me. And sometimes a turn, or sometimes the whole like focus of the poem is on being able to make certain sounds or to create a certain texture in sound. And I think that when you knew me in Iowa, when Zach knew me in Iowa, I was quite focused on that also. So I feel as though I'm continuing something I don't consider myself a performance poet. I mean, I'm sure every poet in this room has been asked if they know Amanda Gorman and stuff. I've definitely been asked that, and people have told me their impression of her performance. And I was really delighted by her delivery as well. But I don't think that I'm a performance poet the way that she is. I think that the way that I came into poetry was very much about the page and then reading off of the page. But I'm interested in performance. I'm interested in people like Emner Bercier Philip, who did Zong. And that type of work, even though it's very different from my own. But the short answer is that I do want the poem to sound good when it's spoken aloud.
Does it help you with lineation?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, right. So reading out loud helps you find where the line settles in.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
See, mine's a total mea culpa with that. It's one of the many things I tell my students religiously to do and then never do is read them out loud as I go. I read them in my head, obviously, but the way that I force it is I rewrite them longhand, which is how I still compose over and over. Kind of that's my trial by fire. Like, is this line gonna stick? Is this enjambment gonna stick? Is this sound gonna work? I just keep rewriting it and then kind of saying it in my head, seeing it as a line. Um, but I mean, I'm not above admitting that, like, when I'm getting ready for this, I'm sitting out. We had a beautiful day in Kansas City today. Thank God, it's like 60s. And I sat out on a little porch and just read out loud over and over to kind of get these out of my head for the first time in a minute. Um, so I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I compose very much on the page with a sense of a line as this written thing that I keep reading in the voice of my head, which of course is a little bit different than my spoken voice. That weird, uncanny sensation of hearing yourself on a phone message or something, right? So no, I don't read out loud nearly enough, but I feel like half of my practice is kind of making up for that. I do all these things to make sure that I'm putting weight on the music and the line.
But when you do read out loud, does does it then change your composition at all? Do you ever find yourself then editing or wishing you could edit after reading, or is your
Oh, totally.
process okay? Because I was thinking maybe your process is such that you've matched up that voice enough to the spoken and the internalized voice to where it doesn't shift.
No, I feel like most of the time I catch that stuff in my endlessly revising on the page, but then tonight I won't even go back and point out what it was. I skipped a word, not because I thought it was a bad word, but I was like that's an extra step that this line doesn't need.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I should. Thank you for the question. I should read aloud more often, but I don't.
that's my Jewish guilt coming right at you, just shooting right into you. I So I mean, I could talk to you guys all night. I just have one more question, and that is, since I wouldn't even say that we're rounding the corner yet of this pandemic. I mean, there's still who knows what's going to happen, and I know I believe I'm teaching in the summer online again. Um, we'll see, but I'm not going to go into a too deep of a question of how has this changed your practice or what have you done that you haven't done before. I'm just curious, what have you either read recently or seen recently, or what is really like jazzed you recently that that you could maybe pass on to someone else who's here tonight, that could give them some shot in the arm, and let's say, and it could be anything. Like I know I watched uh Curtis's new documentary series. I spent 6 or 7 hours watching, I Can't Get You Out of My Head. And as phantasmagoric as that is, it really made me feel a little bit more in place with history, recent history. how we got here. So is there anything, it doesn't have to be poetry, it can be music, it could be whatever. Is there something that really has given you a shot in the arm? And whoever wants to go first.
I'll go. So I'm teaching a seminar for like upper division undergraduates who are doing our basically our poetry major, and I made it all about home and house, and the kind of the one book in common that we have is The Poetics of Space, the
Oh
Bachelor.
yeah, yeah.
And I think we're reading it like as poets would read phenomenological text, which is, we're not going to read it in order to take an exam on what happens on page X and what XYZ, but rather to kind of lift sentences and to talk about particular ideas. So his formulation of the house as existing as much in reality as it does in dream, and in daydream and in memory feels really relevant for right now. I mean, the house is a contained space, but Bachelard argues that it actually is quite diaphanous and it expands through multiple zones of thought and imagination. So even though we feel really boxed in right now, and I certainly do, the place where we find ourselves now could actually be quite inspiring and generative of poems that would be different than they would be if we were able to come and go as frequently as we did in the before time. So I really recommend it.
No, that's great. I love that text. BJ, what about you?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of two things. One is just really practically, which is funny, coming on the heels of me saying I don't read my own stuff out loud, is that having a newborn in a house in a pandemic, especially when it's like 10 below last week, like the levels of kind of cabin fever that are accumulating. I've been singing a whole lot because I just walk him in circles around the dining room and sing, and I've found all these old songs. The longer, the better, right? And so I'll suddenly just be making these connections and be singing an old blues song, and then Moonshiner, and then a David Berman lyric, and then whatever. And I don't want to wake him up, so I'm constantly turning it into the longest, most kind of multiple personality kind of compilation song ever. So even when we do have a nice day, I put Spotify on in my back pocket and take him for a walk with some weird playlist. So music has been, I've always loved music, but it's been kind of a replacement for being outdoors and social for me lately. But in terms of text, actually, the thing that's gotten me through this last semester, I knew that I was having a hard time teaching online after the end of last spring, and then I went through summer. So I just said, fuck it, and gave brand new texts to all of my classes. I was like, I'm going to read new, not new to me necessarily, but new teaching. So my creative writing class, we're reading Morgan Parker, There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce, and Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son. And then I got Rebecca Solnit's The Mother of All Questions, and that's like what my Comp 2 class is reading. And so it's not a particular text necessarily, but just that idea of we're in insane times. And I mean, with my teaching, my entire process has been to try and be as transparent as possible and just say none of us are okay, nothing's normal, talk to me if you have issues, but also like let's just do new stuff, let's try new things, let's use this as an excuse to redefine what a semester of talking about books can look like. So that's been really, I feel like a lifesaver, is just scrapping all of the stuff I was comfortable with, however great I thought my lesson plan was, and saying, guess what, we're reading this. So yeah, that's been helpful for me.
No, that's great. I put some Willie Nelson in the chat for you because I remember just walking around to Stardust with my daughter who's now 17, listening to Willie Nelson Stardust every single night when I would do the midnight feedings, and and sometimes I'd forget to take that. What's that monitor? That SIDS monitor? Do you have that thing where maybe people have calmed down about the whole SIDS thing, but it was like this thing that if you didn't turn it off and you took her off it, if the monitor thought she stopped breathing, and it would go, "Brr, brr, brr," which would wake her up, and then Willie Nelson singing in the background. So anyway, that was the thing that kept me calm in that kind of repetitious lifestyle, which is a newborn. But anyway, thank you so much, guys, for spending time with everyone tonight. It was really, these have been so rewarding. There was a moment where I thought, okay, I'm not going to do this because of the pandemic, and I'm so glad that didn't happen, and that I could, have you guys here and other writers that would normally be around. So anyway, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who showed up. And please come back next month to hear Emily Pettit and Jason Teal. And then there'll be another reading in April, and then in May will be a Common Sense reading release, which will probably do something weird, Facebook Live or something with contributors. So anyway, everyone have a great night. Thank you so much to Kiki and BJ, and have a great night. Take care. See everybody.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Good night.
Thank
Good night.
you. Thank you.